The story begins with a man named Joe, who was a manager at a company. One day when he opened his eyes, he found himself locked in a prison-like building. He had no idea how he got there. Surrounding him were high walls, a metal door in front, and a stone grinder in the middle of the room. Poor Joe, panicking, started calling for help, but the prisoner in the next room told him to keep quiet. Joe then approached the mesh screen and asked the man what was happening. The man, who introduced himself as Nick, explained that Joe had been drugged, and as a result, he would feel very down for a few days. Nick advised Joe to rest, as the next day would be tough. Joe didn't understand how to get out of there. Just then, a guard threw in some food and a bottle of water through a small hole in the door. Joe rushed to it and begged the guard, explaining that his wife was pregnant and he needed to leave. But the guard ignored him and shut the hole, injuring Joe's hand. Joe then used his tie to bandage his hand and began eating the food. That evening, Joe noticed a light on the wall, followed by a computerized voice welcoming him to the advanced career training program. Joe was still confused, so he asked Nick, who revealed that this place was a prison-like facility created by their company, where people like Joe were sent for not performing well at work. The next morning, Joe received more food, and as he was eating, he saw a human skeleton buried in the ground. Terrified, he rushed to Nick again and asked if someone had died there. Nick told him that many had died while working in this place. Joe couldn't believe that the company could do something like this. Nick reminded him that they had all signed contracts before joining the company, agreeing to participate in this program, though no one ever read the full contract. Now they had to face the consequences. Later, the computerized voice informed Joe that he had to turn the stone grinder from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. each day, earning 1 point per turn, and he had to make at least 50 turns daily, or he would be punished. The prisoner with the fewest turns would lose their life, even if they had completed the day's 50 turns. Joe begged again to go home, but Nick warned him that it was useless. Left with no other option, Joe started working. Turning the heavy grinder wasn't easy, but Joe gave it his all and completed 100 turns by the end of the day, then collapsed from exhaustion. He was woken up by the sound of another prisoner's screams, as they were being executed. The next morning, Joe was having breakfast with Nick, who discovered that Joe had completed 100 turns the previous day. Nick warned him not to overwork, as the company would just make him do more if they saw him doing well. But Joe believed that by working harder, he could earn his freedom sooner and be reunited with his pregnant wife. While working, Joe remembered the day he had gifted his wife, Kate, a new home, making her very happy. The following day, Kate had asked Joe to take time off from work and go with her to the doctor. But Joe hesitated, and Kate was deeply upset, feeling that Joe valued work more than his family. Suddenly, an alarm rang, and Joe realized he had completed 150 turns. Afterward, a guard called him to the door and asked him to strip. Joe thought he was going to be killed and begged for mercy, but the guard ignored him. To his surprise, Joe was taken to a pool, where he realized he was only being asked to bathe. Days passed, and Joe continued to work tirelessly under the scorching sun. Due to the heat, he drank more water, and soon his bottle was empty. When he asked the guard for more water, Nick told him they only received enough to survive. Despite being exhausted, Joe kept working, remembering the promise he made to Kate about paying the hospital bills. Finally, at the end of the day, he collapsed and learned from the AI that he had completed 370 turns. While resting, Joe noticed a name etched under the handle. Alex. Curious, he asked Nick about it. Nick revealed that Alex was the only person who had ever escaped from this place alive. The company then awarded Joe a pen, but it was of no use to him, which frustrated him. The next day, Joe found that he now had to complete 370 turns instead of 50. When Joe protested, saying his injured hands couldn't handle it, the computerized voice told him that humans are capable of more than they think. As Joe began turning the grinder again, he noticed that even after one turn, he wasn't earning any points. The AI explained that he was being punished, and now he had to make 2 turns to earn a single point, meaning he would have to make 370 turns. With no other choice, Joe got back to work, but his body gave out, and he collapsed. The AI informed him that he hadn't completed the required turns. The image of Kate appeared on the wall, and the AI warned that if Joe didn't complete his task, Kate would end up in the prison too. Fearful, Joe promised to meet his target the next day. Joe used his coat to cushion his injured hands and threw himself into his work. After a while, his mind began playing tricks on him, and he saw visions of himself laughing at his own misery. Ignoring this, Joe pushed through and managed to complete his target just before 10 p.m. Exhausted, he fell asleep. The next morning, the AI rewarded Joe with a video of his wife and son, who was now walking. Joe's eyes filled with tears as he realized how much time had passed since he'd been locked up. Later, he asked Nick how Alex had managed to escape. Nick hesitated but, learning about Joe's unborn child, decided to help him. He told Joe to check the spot behind the pillar, where the cameras couldn't see. Joe found a hollow area and began chiseling at it with his pen. Days passed, and Joe continued working on the hole during his free time until it was large enough for him to escape. Just as Joe crawled inside, he was caught by the guard and beaten badly. When he woke up, the hole had been filled, and now he was sentenced to complete 1,000 turns. Meanwhile, Nick was punished for helping Joe and had his legs cut off, leaving him unable to work. Joe felt terrible for him and started thinking of a way out. Nick revealed that AI didn't understand human emotions, and it was then revealed that Nick was actually Alex, the same person who had designed the prison while working in the company's IT department. Alex had hidden this from Joe, hoping someone would succeed in escaping through the hole. Finally, Joe came up with a plan and told the other prisoners that if none of them completed a single turn, everyone's score would remain equal and the computer wouldn't be able to punish anyone. Joe convinced all the prisoners to stop working. The day began, and no one worked. But at the end of the day, the AI announced that all prisoners with 0 points would be executed. Fearful, the other prisoners began working, and Joe's plan failed. Alex urged Joe to keep turning the grinder, or he too would be killed. Joe managed to complete 1 turn before the time ran out, but he felt awful for Alex, who couldn't make a single turn without his legs. That night, Alex revealed that he wasn't Nick but Alex himself. He had tried to escape through the hole but was caught and placed in a different cell. He hadn't told Joe earlier because he hoped someone would escape through the hole. The next day, AI showed Joe another video of Kate, and now their son had learned to walk. Seeing this, Joe realized how long he'd been trapped and was filled with anger. He cursed the company, but the AI warned him that such behavior wouldn't be tolerated, and Joe was sentenced to death by hanging. Company officials arrived with guards, preparing a lethal injection. As the guard began taunting Joe about his wife and son, Joe snapped and brutally attacked him. The AI announced that the guard had failed his duties, and if Joe killed the guard, he would be moved to the next level. Joe stopped, shouting that he wasn't a monster. He refused to let the company turn him into a beast. Suddenly, Joe returned to reality and found himself sitting in his office. It was all part of a highly advanced virtual program, with everyone connected to machines. His HR, who looked just like the guard, informed Joe that although it felt like months had passed, only an hour had gone by, meaning his son hadn't been born yet and everything was still the same. Through this experiment, the HR team had assessed that Joe hadn't received a promotion because he hadn't been adequately challenged. After seeing how Joe handled every task in the program, the company decided to promote him. They handed Joe his new cabinet and asked him to sign an agreement, prohibiting him from discussing the experiment with anyone. After HR left, Joe called Kate. Hearing her voice brought tears to his eyes, and he told her how much he loved her and their unborn child. If you liked the video, then please like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.